Yes, I'm Marci. I'm now currently working for Melbourne Design Studios, but this campus is very close to my heart. It's the culmination of ideas about the integration of environmental concerns into architectural and urban design. Played out over a 10-year period, and I used to joke that it was my first baby. My daughter was born just in time for the opening of the first building in 1996. So there she is, just in time for the first building. I was brought up to have a social conscience, strongly aware of the environmental issues and the profound effect it had on my view of life. When Jack Mundy and the BLF and green bands were at the forefront of environmental activism, I was studying architecture. I wanted to make some sort of difference. I wanted to contribute to a fairer world. I was working in Canberra as an architect when I noticed that the university was looking for someone to head up their newly created Office of Design. The forward-looking former Vice-Chancellor, Clifford Blake, had instituted a service much akin to a private architectural office. The university already had a history of in-house management of construction, and the Office of Design added to that in-house preparation of briefs, design and documentation. These buildings are articulated in rammed earth and recycled timber, glass, bricks and steel. They invite questions about materials and construction. Buildings orientated for solar access, kinky angled roofs collecting daylight and solar energy, earth thermal exchange, night cooling, natural ventilation, and a windmill speak of renewable resources. Careful use of space and over 40 composting toilets teach about waste. The integrated water tanks, the meandering constructed wetlands and creeks animate the criticality of water in this dry, arid region. The formation of vistas to the few stands of remnant trees and the living museum of endemic planting along the waterways gives a voice to biodiversity and ecosystems. The formation of, the use of natural ventilation, daylight and non-toxic materials breathe comfort and health. The outcomes are observable. One can see how the built environment influences how people live in this learning laboratory, breathing fresh air, basking in natural light, socialising with one another, planting permaculture gardens, and they've even maintained free bicycles for use around the campus. So the story began in 1993 when I joined the university. This was the site that was being progressively purchased by the university, and it was really a field of Patterson's curse with the odd remnant tree. We undertook the site planning based on environmental principles, and one of the first things we looked at was the water, vegetation and the form of the earth. So we found that we could connect up this rather hilly site with an 18-metre high sort of knoll in the centre of it by linking the contours and using that to form the basis of our road and path network. We were able to achieve wheelchair accessible gradients along all of the pathways. And then the water management sort of underpinned that site planning, as did the remaining endemic vegetation, which was very slight, but our approach to that vegetation and the re-establishment of it. So the key water management features, which I'm not really going to go into in this talk. I'll focus more on rammed earth, but they're visible in this slide. So the water, the storm, there's three systems really. There's the integrated water tanks that collect the purest water from the roofs, and it's used in various systems, or was used in various systems. It's used for laundries, it was used for evaporative cooling, and, sorry. The stormwater from around the buildings is collected through the swales that you'll notice that run either side of the buildings, and that also take the overflow from the tanks. That goes down some main artificially constructed creeks that have in-stream wetlands. It's then purified in the series of treatment wetlands until it comes to its resting place temporarily in the deepest wetland, where it then can be pumped up using a solar pump or windmill to the top of the hill, where there's a large turkey's nest dam that was made from the spoil of the first lot of minor excavation, because we were along the contours for the roads. So that turkey's nest dam can then hold water and re-release it through the system so that it is always kept clean and can't stagnate and contribute to mosquito breeding. Those wetlands are still operating today very well, I am told, by properties. And additional to that, I said there are three main streams, are the grey water treatment wetlands. They operate by gravity feed. We have eliminated black water in these original buildings by introducing composting toilets. And the grey water is then taken by gravity to the treatment wetlands, which are gravel-based with reed beds, and that water is treated in the grey water in these grey water wetlands before it is deposited in the stormwater treatment regime. So the water is really used for its purity level and used and held on site in a self-sufficient sort of manner. We weren't allowed to drink the water because the insurance company decided that, or told the university that they wouldn't approve their insurance if they were going to connect up the drinking water to the tanks. So over the 10 years that we worked on this campus, there were a whole range of buildings. The first one was the student, we called it the Student Pavilion at the time. It's now the bookshop in 1996. We then built a complex of, we called it Stage 1 at the time, a complex of office buildings for over 100 staff, and specialist teaching building for mapping and GIS, and a herbarium that was part of the regional network of herbariums. Along with that Stage 1 came the first wetlands and some of the roadworks, major servicing, as well as the information technology hub that still sits at the centre of the campus, and was symbolic, I think, of the changing sort of nature of our world, as well as being a sort of intersection between the academic part of the campus and the public part of the campus and the student residential part of the campus. The second stage was largely the lecture theatre complex that we're in now. The student association building followed that. It's just got the wrong date. The residences came in between, and then the final building that we did in the earth before I left, and my key design colleague left, and the Vice Chancellor left, was the School of Education. Now, these buildings, the real luxury of having a decade of work was that each building and cluster of buildings was able to build on the experience of the previous buildings. So they're all slightly different, and on the site tour we can delve into some of those differences. But I'm going to focus on the first stage of buildings, which was the typical office building, and it really epitomizes the key features in terms of passive design, in terms of two-story rammed earth construction that we went on to expand on in the other projects and develop. So this was an office building, as I said, for a bit over 100 staff. It was for the School of Environmental and Information Sciences, and they were instrumental in these buildings getting the go-ahead from the university. People often ask me, well, how did you convince the university to build these rather nuts and berries buildings that had these unusual passive systems? And really it was down to two things: the enormous support of the staff on the campus, the head of school at the time, David Mitchell, who was also our water consultant, whose specialist area was freshwater wetlands, and the many staff that supported what we were doing. So we were quite fortunate that it was the School of Environmental Management or Environmental Science and Information, we're very fortunate that they were the first people to be moving in, because they understood what we were talking about and they were very behind us. Really wouldn't have happened otherwise. And in addition to that, we had an on-site university construction manager who was absolutely brilliant, not only as a tradesperson, carpenter originally, but as a person. And he gathered together the teams that built these buildings. And so without those people contributing, this never would have happened. The other aspect of how it got approved, which I think is important to mention, is the design process and how we dealt with the executive of the university and the board. What we did was to lead them through, step by step, why and how we'd made certain decisions. Right from the early thinking about the campus. So the first things that were agreed to were the basic principles underlying our design decisions. And then once we'd got concurrence with that, everything else would start to fall in place. So that was a very interesting process as well. As I said, I'm going to discuss the School of Environmental and Information Sciences building, which was an office building that did get modelled as well, which is another reason I'm going to focus on it. We didn't have much money for consultants. We built our own buildings. We did our own landscaping. Often the Vice Chancellor would turn up at a campus with trees to plant and give them direct to the gardeners. And we didn't use many consultants. So it was in an era when if you wanted something done, you just went out, did it. So we didn't have a lot of consultants, but we did manage to get very generously a very low fee from an interested thermal performance modeler who did model this larger group of buildings and give us some confidence that the first prototype building would successfully upscale and work as a permanent home for people. The first building being the student pavilion, which was really like a small student union. So the main aspects of this building and how it operates are it's got a summer and winter mode as well as a shoulder season mode, but I'll just keep to the simple summer and winter. So in the summer mode, when the temperature outside drops below the temperature inside, the low-level vents that you'll see under the windows open up. There's louvers above the doors, and we rely on the occupants to open those in the hot weather. The air is then drawn through with thermal buoyancy and through the thermal chimney. And so that brings the cool air if there is cool air in the daytime, but usually at night, through the building and out the chimney. The rammed earth is all structural, and these internal walls are what's doing the work thermally, and they've been enhanced beyond their structural needs, thickened up to contribute that thermal mass. Then we've got the floors that are ribbed, here again to enhance the exposure of the thermal mass, and on the ceiling as well, and embedded in those slabs are hydronic pipework. So going back to the summer mode, outdoor temperature drops below indoor temperature, vents open up, the cooler air moves through the building. When we need more cooling, the solar panels that work for heating in the wintertime produce cold water at night. They fill up the thermal tanks, and then the hydronic system can draw that cooler water through the pipe, through the concrete, and provide additional cooling to the building. In the wintertime, what happens is we rely on people to just use the windows for a little minimal ventilation. The vents will remain closed. And these floor slabs are heated through the hydronic pipework. The primary feed to that will be taking from the solar heated water that's stored in a thermal tank either under the building or in some bulkhead areas. And if that is not sufficient, there is a gas boiler that kicks in. So the windows were modelled for daylight in terms of sizing them, and we kept to, and their size and shape was determined really for the best daylighting conditions, but modified to not exceed 30% of the wall area, as that was determined through the modelling and common sense as being critical in this climate to the heat loss and gains. So the windows have been kept relatively modest. And now we'll have a look at how this plays out in the building. So you can see the vents that operate under the windows. Also, in the internal photographs, and you can pick it on these external, you'll see that we've got all recycled timber used in the joinery and in the early buildings in the structure as well, but then we moved to plantation certified timbers for the structure. But all of the window frames and doors and joinery are all recycled timber. So there's the chimney stacks and the windows and the sunshades as well. I'll just comment, they were prototyped. This building was built by Earth Structures, Rick Lindsay, and the first building we did was with Rick. And it was really, so many people contributed so generously. It was absolutely essential to the success of these buildings. So Rick was the contractor for the first building, and he taught us many things about rammed earth. And then we really used him as an unpaid consultant after that for these next buildings, and developed the rammed earth under his guidance to be simple to detail, to be economic. So there's no raked walls in this. Some of the key economies that Rick pointed us to, all of it's structural earth, so all of the walls are either a T shape, a U shape, or an L. And so that gives them the inherent strength. It's all unreinforced except for a few columns. So all of this is unreinforced, very low cement concrete content. I think is like we tried to keep it down about, from memory, about 2%. So almost unstabilised, unreinforced, and designed for economy. And that's why, for example, we don't have overfills on the windows. That was worked out with Rick. How can we keep the cost of this building down? Because we were struggling to build these buildings for the cost of basically a cavity brick 2-storey building that they built in Wagga Wagga, with evap cooling and gas ducted heating and a tile roof, very domestic. So that was our benchmark. So that was another critical thing to get right. The thermal chimney inside is designed to let in light as well as operate as a chimney. And to enhance the light, we were very lucky in finding this 3-storey construction of library stacks from the 1930s that was being demolished, and we acquired all the glass, which had glass floors with library shelves. They've been used in each of the offices. They adjust to 1/8 of an inch. So steel library shelves that sat on this post steel structure with angles that came across to form the floor. We've rejigged it here completely, but we have reused the steel angles, the steel beams, and the glass flooring and the shelving. And that was from the Dixon stacks in Sydney. Other things that, like, we were able to do economically, but under Rick's guidance, is we've blocked out on the bottom of the walls a duct, simple cover plate of recycled timber, and that's the services ducting for the IT and electrical. And these picture rails, here again, simply blocked out and added. The light fittings, I'll just mention while we're on this slide. We had standard costs for light fittings, $30 approximately a light fitting, based on what we put in on all the campuses. But we worked with a local metal worker to create a variety of these perforated metal light fittings. They're all through the offices as well, with that were affordable and met our budget. But still, they weren't plastic. Like, these buildings have no plastic, no PVC. They're all non-toxic paints. This is what the hydronics looks like. So that's a slab prepared with the hydronic pipework. There's different zones. Each office, I think they're paired, and then they go to a feeder pipe, and those feeder pipes go back to a manifold, and that can be fed either by the solar tank, and that's the exchange coils with the solar panels to heat the water in the tank, or to cool it for night cooling in the summertime, and that we'll take from the tank if the temperatures are sufficient, and if they're not, this boiler will kick in. So that is the plant room for an office building for over 100 people. Except there's 2 of those, sorry. And how it performs? These are some monitored results we got off the system when it was the first summer after it was opened, and the cooling ceiling was not commissioned yet. So this is the building operating simply with the night cooling. You can see the temperatures are hitting, so the green is the building, the red and the blue are the outdoor temperatures. They're hitting over 35 degrees and consistently over 30 in the daytime, dipping down to typically about 15, but as much as 10 at night. So that's that sort of desert climate condition that really helps us with the thermal mass. But the building stays stable. This is, I met with Properties yesterday, and they've just, because there it is before the system was put in, they somehow managed to turn off the BMS system, and the building was left with no ventilation for 4 years or so, as far as I can tell. And then somebody decided that maybe it wasn't working right, and they got a new BMS system, and this is where it's kicked in. And so this is a record of the temperatures just through summer, that the hottest part of our summer now. Building management system. So it's the computer controls that are operating those vents to, like when the air outside drops down, needs to know what temperature it is, and it has to kick in with some cooling. So it's just the computer control system. So ignore this bit, because this is sort of when they just turned it on. And you can see that the building's sitting comfortably between about 21 and 18, but there is some additional cooling being added in now, because people had forgotten that the cooling system in the ceilings was there. And so when they turned it all back on after it had been idle, they didn't turn on the cooling. So they've now added some additional cooling. But you can see it's still operating really well. So here's a day, sort of middle of summer, or towards the end of summer. So that's when it gets hottest. And what this is showing you is, here's the outdoor temperature, and here's the indoor temperature. There's no active systems kicking in. If there was an active system kicking in, it comes up to 4. So this 3, it's semi-active. These are the vents opening where it goes above the line. That's the vents opening. When it goes below the line, it's in what they call static mode. So it's actually just sitting there, because the outdoor two is the active mode. So it's gone into active mode, and the building's just maintained its steady state. So I think it sort of demonstrates that the building can maintain very comfortable conditions, maybe not air-conditioned 22 degrees all the time, but very comfortable conditions. The electricity it uses, well, I was told it uses less than a quarter of the gas of this main building, like now, recent times, less than a quarter of the gas. So we had this building to compare it with, which was fully air-conditioned. This is an old comparison, so the new figure is that it uses less than a quarter. At the time, we looked at all the combined energy, kilowatt use per square metre, and it's sitting at less than half of all the electricity use of the building that was existing, a typical commercial office building And that, I think, tells the whole story. It was also, that's the lecture theatre, that's the office building. These typical other campuses, that's their average figures. So we're sitting like at half. And water consumption doesn't even rate, in a sense. I mean, we're at 25 litres a square metre for the environmental sciences building, and the air-conditioned building's at 525 litres per square metre. I'm probably running out of time to really talk much about this, but this is some of the modelling that we did. The temperature, the way to read it is this was the base model. So this is the sort of just the basic rammed earth building with really basic sun shading and nothing else. And then what we did was we looked at, well, how can we improve it? So these are the number of hours that it'll go over the temperature that's in this column here. So the basic building, it is getting up to 38, for an hour, and 39. And I mean, it's just a model. Like, models mean nothing except within the model itself. It's only comparing itself to a model. It's not real life. But still, it gives you an indication. And so then we optimized it. So we added the ceiling slab. We looked at what the modeled results told us would give us the best results. We put sun shading. You'll see the sun shading. We put sun shading on the sides as well as on the over the windows, on the sides of the windows. We put the ceiling slabs, this top ceiling slab in for extra thermal mass, as well as the cooling. But this doesn't take in, these are just the passive measures. And we went through each decision, and we had to not take up some of them. For example, a thermally massive chimney, which we dearly wanted to have. We don't really know because the model was difficult to deal. The model didn't really deal that well with that, but the modelling told us that the thermally massive chimney wouldn't really add a lot to the operation of the building, etc. So we went through these features and determined what would add the most. As I said, won't have time to talk about each building, but the next group of buildings that we did were the lecture theatre complex and the information technology hub. So it was different in that I explained we had a thermal tank that we'd fill with hot water in the winter and cold water in the summer, but we've got quite a significant shoulder season that can be really hot one day and really cold the next, which we'll probably experience right now during this conference. So we had a beautiful warm day the first day, and then it got quite chilly last night. So this building had that, we'd learnt that the thermal tank, there was a shoulder period where it had to switch over from hot to cold, and where we didn't have any additional capacity. So in this building we put 2 tanks so that we could have one cold tank, one hot tank in these shoulder seasons. That was also important because when you get 200 people plus filling this lecture theatre, that's a whole lot of hot, warm bodies. And you need some instant cooling, even though you might have been in winter mode. So underneath, I'll go to this. Just underneath this area here, between the 2 composting toilet basements, are 2 thermal tanks. So we can switch between hot and cold in the shoulder seasons. And then in the middle of winter, you'd have both hot. In the middle of summer, you have both cold. So it worked very similar principles to the office building, but we've got this instant load to deal with. So we needed extra cooling, and we put in these ponds and spray mist and a waterfall that goes through a perforated metal sheet. So you create a body of water with raindrop-sized droplets and spray mist. If you need additional cooling, you turn on the spray mist. Then underneath that are louvers that open up, and that's where the fresh air intake is. So in the winter, you just don't run the pond, you just open up the vents, and in the summer, the pond would be operating with the spray mist and the rainfall. And the chimney here is designed for blackout, but it's actually got the required neck and to get the air out. And yeah, this building works, I think, quite well. I won't go, when I do the site tour, I'll tell you the modifications that have been made that are quite severe and in some cases disappointing, but I won't go into them now. So that was a big change we made in this complex of buildings, how we operated it. And the additional problem came about of creating blackout with the thermal chimneys, and then in the other smaller lecture areas and classrooms, there was a problem with transfer of sound because there's one thermal chimney that they're all feeding off, and so that has a quite interesting sort of sound buffer in it, integrated in the thermal chimney. We had another set of problems with the student union when we designed it, and that was to do with getting like 300 hot, sweaty bodies dancing to some band in there at once, or a wedding on a really hot day because the student union made most of its money from events. And we had to guarantee cooling. So with this building, we attached a chiller to the cold water system. So we had the two tanks that we'd had in the lecture theatre complex, but to those two tanks, we also could plug in a chiller to get cooling. And for extra thermal mass for this single-storey building that was going to have high population and potentially lots of movement with things heating up, we developed these precast concrete beams for the hydronic system for the cooling. And as I said, yeah, they're fed by the night cooled water and the chiller if the additional chilling's needed. The floor is the same, it's got the hydronic heating. Terrific, thanks. So in summary, we've created, I think, an exemplar of how we can live on a neighbourhood scale, like lots of people in comfortable places that don't do much environmental damage, have a light footprint, appropriate to the climate and place, that use very little water, very little energy, have all fresh air, 100% fresh air, and that, I think, is really an example that could be taken and scaled up quite easily, like to either larger buildings or neighbourhoods in terms of the urban design. It's been really popular. We get tourists coming. This is from the council website, things to do. And I think that's really to the credit of the people here at the campus. They've integrated this campus with a lot of educational programs that have quite a range of age groups. So the School of Education brings primary students, high school students, as well as university students that really are learning from this campus. And I think informing this whole story is the interrelatedness of decisions about the thermally massive rammed earth of the campus buildings and the key determinants of the passive design strategies, the local availability of skills and materials, ecological impact and toxicity. They're all critical to protecting the design from cost cutting. We really needed to ensure that there was a multiplicity of reasons for every decision. Every facet of the design had to have a defence, so that a dual purpose, at least a dual purpose. That way, that's how we protected certain features. So if people wanted to take out the concrete ceilings, they lost their cooling, etc. down the line. Everything had a dual purpose. There's really no easily applied prescription for green design. It's really inseparable from the early design decisions. However, prioritising a passive approach leads to a radically different set of decisions about building form and materials compared to the application of a traditional mechanical heating, ventilation and air conditioning mentality. So that's what I'd like to leave, the thoughts I'd like to leave you with, that multiplicity of reasoning, taking a very different approach right at the beginning, not trying to plug it in afterwards, and how all those things are interrelated. Thank you.